Right now, Sally James is on the line with the Cato Institute. Cato.org, of course, is their website. And recently published over on realclearmarkets.com a thought-provoking article. Free trade is a boon to the environment is the topic. Sally James is a policy analyst at the Cato Institute's Center for Trade Policy Studies. Sally, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Tom.
Thank you for coming on our program. Do we sacrifice the future of the American middle class and the planet's health so that Americans can continue to buy cheap junk from China?
I would say probably the opposite. Everything I've read suggests that we're sacrificing, the middle class by not allowing them to buy cheaper products from China or elsewhere. And by protecting American industries, I would argue we harm the middle class, and in fact there's some link to suggest that we harm the environment as well. I would like to say that I did not actually pick the title to that op-ed. If you read the op-ed, I'm sure you have, you'll see that the title does not quite capture what I was trying to say in the op-ed, which is actually more about the costs of protectionism in fighting global warming.
Right, and I'd like to get into that. Are you suggesting then that if a computer or a toy or pretty much anything else is manufactured 6, 8, 10,000 miles away from where it's to be sold and transported that same distance, even though the labor is cheaper and it's more profitable for the corporation, enormous amounts of carbon are used in that transportation, that is A, somehow good for the environment, and B, somehow good for American workers?
That's an excellent point. Well, the transportation cost is not what I was addressing in this op-ed either. That is a really good point, that in fact the actual act of trade, so directly trading, adds to the cost environment because we're shipping stuff. However, again, if you look at the data and you look at the value of shipments divided by its weight, so in other words, if we're shipping very cheap stuff a long way, that's worse for the environment than if it's relatively lighter. Exactly.
Right.
What we now see is that value per weight is going up. In other words, the transport.
Well, that's because the cost of transportation is going up.
No, the cost of transportation by value of shipment is going down. That's exactly my point. So in other words, if you're bulk shipping heavy stuff, then the costs of cheap, and it's very cheap, the cost of that is going to be higher.
But in the abstract, I still fail to see how you can build a case. I mean, you say, for example, too often in your article, too often the temptation among G20 countries to subsidize and protect their own has proven too great to resist. Well, of course, because it benefits them as nations. Why should the United States have, after having essentially a protectionist trade policy since 1793, when Alexander Hamilton's 1791 report on manufactures was adopted in large part, in piece by piece, but was adopted by the legislature in 1793 during the George Washington administration, and held until the last 2 years of the Carter administration, when Carter started his deregulatory spree, and then really the doors got kicked open with Reagan, and then just smashed open when Bill Clinton ratified GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trades, and created the WTO and the North American Free Trade Agreement. Over the last 30 years, we have, in the United States, no longer been protecting domestic industries and domestic manufacture, and guess what? They've all vanished. What possible benefit is there to the environment or to Americans that the things that you walk into a Walmart and everything you see in there was no longer made in the United States? It was made someplace else on the planet where environmental standards are lower, where labor is cheaper, and where you have to use carbon to transport it 6, 8, 10, 12,000 miles.
Okay, that's quite a long question. I don't know which one you want me to address first.
Well, how is it possibly good?
Because it's cheaper. People are voting with their dollars every day that they want cheap products.
That's because they don't have decent manufacturing jobs anymore, so they don't have any income, so they have to buy the cheapest stuff. If we were still making things here and people had good union jobs making clothing and making shoes and making jeans, Levi closed their last factory in the United States 4 years ago. If people were still making things here in the United States and had a decent wage, they could pay a little bit more for things made in the U.S., like we always did.
People still make a decent wage. If you look at the data and you look at the cost, in other words,
the average wage in the United States just in the last 8 years has dropped $1,400.
Do you want me to answer your question or not? Please,
sure,
let me finish. Where you look at the data, and it shows that, in fact, the net services jobs created partly from opening to trade pay better on average than the manufacturing jobs that were lost. In other words, people are moving from manufacturing to services, and it is not true to say that they are all swapping well-paid union jobs for burger flipping in non-union industries. That is not true if you look at the data, okay? Every year...
What are they swapping them for, then?
For management jobs, for services jobs, working in an office rather than on a factory floor. It's just not true if you look at the data to say that we're all unemployed. The American economy produces millions of net jobs a year, net. So in other words, it's job churn. Yes, it is true that manufacturing jobs have been lost. But it is not true to say that, not the recession notwithstanding, that we've had high unemployment as a result of trade policies. Also, if you want to talk about the middle class, America is not a free trade country. It still maintains tariffs on goods like clothing and agricultural products that are consumed by poorer Americans as a higher percentage of their income.
Right, but those average tariffs have gone from 30-40% down to 2%.
But the point, that's average.
2.2% is our average U.S.
But if you look at tariffs on goods that are consumed by poorer Americans, in other words, rich people don't buy cheap shoes from Walmart, okay, and they have higher tariffs on them than the more expensive shoes that you can buy in a department store. So if you really want to talk about the effects of American trade policy on poorer people, and if you look at the data, you will find that middle-class Americans are disproportionately harmed by tariffs than richer people are. It is absolutely a regressive tax.
I absolutely disagree. The tariffs historically, why would it be then that during the time that we had high tariffs, the average tariff rate was around 35% from 1935 to 1980, and during that period of time we had the strongest growth of American industry in the history of the world. In 1980 we started cutting our tariffs down to the point now where our average tariff is 2.1%, and we have the middle class disappearing, and particularly with regard to manufacturing.
Because they're getting richer. They're moving up.
Americans are not getting richer. Americans are losing their homes. They're being wiped out. The average American is $7,000 in credit card debt.
I'm sorry, if you're going to link the current recession to overall trends, then I can't do much about that.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not true to link one to the other.
Okay. People can read Sally James's writings over at Cato.com and RealClearMarkets.com. Actually, is where this piece appeared. There, right, Sally?
Thank you.
Sally, thank you so much for dropping by. Cato.org is her website. Up next, what's the bigger picture here? The level of poverty in America is even worse than first believed. This from the Associated Press today out of Washington, D.C. They've a revised formula for calculating medical costs and geographic variation shows that approximately 47.4 million Americans are living in poverty. 7 million more than the government's official figure. That's about 15.8%, or 1 in 6 Americans. Why would it be that so many people are living in poverty? Could it have something to do with the fact that we don't make things here anymore? Other than, of course, weapons and military systems, which we're one of the world's leading exporters. Here's the bigger picture on this whole thing. I started out the first section by telling you the story about Bill Caudle, this 39-year-old in Milwaukee, I believe it was, who couldn't find a job. He lost his job of 20 years and couldn't find a job. And in particular, couldn't find a job that had health insurance. He lost his health insurance when he lost his job. And his wife had ovarian cancer. So in order to get health insurance for his wife, he joined the Army. That's what we've gotten good at. We've gotten good at creating contractors. We've got hundreds of thousands of people who are actually making good money, $150,000, $200,000 a year as contractors, going off to be basically mercenaries, to go to Iraq. We've got contracting companies. We've got a military-industrial complex that's making a fortune. Contracting companies that are selling gasoline to our military in Afghanistan, it was revealed last week, at $400 a gallon. Not a barrel, a gallon. Poverty is rampant. The bottom line is that if a country doesn't manufacture things, it does not create wealth. Now, the manufacturing can be intellectual as well as physical. In other words, somebody can create software. They can create a website. They can create literature or movies or art. Those are all, in my definition, manufacturing. Now, the government is saying, and I remember when Reagan changed the numbers around, or actually it was during the Clinton administration, that they came up with this brilliant idea that McDonald's was a manufacturing operation because they were manufacturing hamburgers. So it wouldn't look, as the Clinton administration went into all this free trade insanity, they said, well, we're not losing that many manufacturing jobs. Look at all these jobs that are being created at McDonald's. They're manufacturing hamburgers. Yeah, they're assembling a hamburger, and yes, they're increasing the value of the raw meat. So arguably that is manufacturing, but that's not creating something of lasting value. That's not creating something that is going to have, a positive and long-term consequential impact on the economy. Adam Smith laid it out in Wealth of Nations. If you take a stick from the ground, it has essentially no value in an economy. If you add human labor to it, if you add the human mind to it and the human hand to it and carve it into an axe handle, it now has value. You have manufactured something. You created something of value. There's a reason why countries protect their domestic industries. Now, one of the most effective ways that countries right now in this so-called tariff-free world are protecting their local industries is with a value-added tax, the VAT tax, which Nancy Pelosi put her toe in that water, about 2 months ago, I think she brought it up. Maybe we should have a VAT tax in America. And all of a sudden, the Chamber of Commerce just exploded, freaked out. Oh, my God, we can't have that. Are you kidding? The way a value-added tax works is that every stage along the way of manufacture, a tax is added. When the iron ore is mined and turned into raw iron, there's a tax added to it. It's very small, but there's a tax. When the pig iron is then converted into steel, there's a tax. When the steel is converted into sheet steel, there's a tax. When the sheet steel is converted into the door of a car, there's a tax. When the door of the car is added to the car, there's a tax. Every time you add value to something, you hit it with a small tax. What this does is it makes it impossible for companies to avoid paying taxes, which of course is why the Chamber of Commerce is hysterical. They don't want it in the United States. But what it also does is because the government then is able to clearly and carefully and substantially track the taxes added to the value of something over time, they can then say in the international marketplace, we've got this car, we've got this Mercedes-Benz that normally would be $30,000 when it's imported into the United States, but part of that cost includes $3,000 worth of value-added taxes from all the way from the iron ore to the finished car and, every piece in it, and we're going to give you a rebate on that tax. That's allowed under the WTO. That's allowed under many of our bilateral and multilateral trade agreements. And we can't offer that kind of a discount on exported goods because we don't have a value-added tax. 120 countries do, and they offer that kind of a discount, and it's a form of trade subsidy. It's a reverse tariff. And it puts us at a tremendous disadvantage. So we need to have some sort of a national industrial trade policy in the United States rather than saying we're going to have so-called free trade. So-called free trade means that the transnational corporations get to control the world of trade, period. And governments no longer have a say in it. We, the people, no longer have any say in it. And it's not good for us. It's not good for America. The other big thing that so-called free trade allows is it allows American companies to basically engage in the arbitrage of labor, to move their manufacturing or their customer service. GE was the company that pioneered this. Jack Welch brags about it in his autobiography when he went over to India and said, hey, these people speak English. Why do I have back office operations? Why do I have customer service people in the United States where I'm paying them $12, $15, $20 an hour when I could be paying Indians $1 an hour? And he started offshoring pink and white collar jobs before it had been all blue collar. But the bottom line is that about half of all international trade, whether it's service jobs or manufacturing jobs, about half of all international trade going in and out of the United States is within companies. It's Hewlett-Packard in the United States manufacturing printers in China by Hewlett-Packard China and then selling them to themselves and keeping the profit in China. And that's not international trade, that's the exporting of labor. And it's wrong.